the chairman, and Jasper is the timekeeper. This debate will be judged by a panel of 3 adjudicators. The topic for tonight is that we should bring manufacturing back to Australia. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Aberfoyle Park High School. The negative team seated to my left is from Pembroke School. The speaking time for this debate is 8 minutes, with a double bell at the end of your speaking time. A warning bell will ring once at 7 minutes. A continuous bell will ring 30 seconds after the final bell. Please switch off your mobile phones and other electronic devices. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Connolly.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that we should bring manufacturing back to Australia. Now, before I move on to my points, I would first like to start off by establishing the definition for tonight's topic. We define should, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, that it is the correct or best thing to do. Next, again as defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, to bring something back, that something of course being manufacturing in this case, means to start to do something that was done in the past. Further, in order to provide a contextualized definition, we will be referring to bringing manufacturing back in line with the bill passed by the federal government, which introduces $15 billion to support, diversify and transform Australia's industry and economy in an effort to, quote, reclaim its reputation as a country that makes things. As for manufacturing, we will be using the Cambridge definition of the business of producing goods in large numbers as a base. However, since the term large numbers is subjective, we will be refining it to mean the business of mass producing goods in order to meet a demand. Finally, we define Australia as all land within the borders of Australia, including in the regions, outer suburbs and remote communities as stated directly in the bill. Overall, we define the topic as that re-establishing the business of mass-producing goods in Australia in an effort to reclaim our reputation as a country that makes things is the best thing to do. We, the affirmative team, believe this statement to be true. Now, onto our team case. As your first speaker, I will establish that bringing manufacturing back to Australia is essential in reducing our vulnerability to global economic disruptions by developing our economic complexity, and that despite it seeming counterintuitive, it will in fact decrease our carbon footprint. Our second speaker will discuss the enhanced workforce resulting from domestic manufacturing and how it will promote innovation in our country, and our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team case. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my first point for this evening is that bringing manufacturing back to Australia will aid in restoring our nation's economic complexity, guarding us from major economic shifts and global shocks, and marking a vital step towards economic growth and security. Currently, Australia lacks heavily in economic diversification and sophistication, and therefore complexity. Despite us having the 12th largest economy, Australia is ranked 82nd for economic complexity, according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity, even below developing countries such as Iran and Lebanon. According to the Harvard Atlas on Economic Complexity, or HAEC, Australia lacks diversity of exports and simply relies too much on other countries. And this lack of economic independence makes us extremely vulnerable to global shocks, and we have seen the ramifications of this, especially in the last couple of years with the COVID-19 pandemic. The World Health Organization reports that there were substantial disruptions to global supply chains in PPE and medical supplies during COVID-19 due to rising demand, panic buying, hoarding misuse, and factories which were closed or reduced operations. This meant that not only was Australia's usual supply disrupted, but we also had to compete against other countries for these essential supplies due to the rising demand. These vulnerabilities in global supply chains have impacted every single person in this room, whether it be a loved one who worked as an essential worker, dangerously ill-equipped to protect themselves and care for COVID-19 patients, or simply not being able to buy hand sanitizer and toilet paper. And these could all have been prevented, or at least minimized, if we were manufacturing these products in Australia. And it is not just from the COVID-19 pandemic that Australia has experienced the consequences of an over-reliance on global supply chains. Some other examples include the feud between Saudi Arabia and Iran, impacting our crude oil supply according to Trading Economics, and the Russia-Ukraine war, which according to the Financial Review have caused half to 3/4 of Australians' inflation spike. This mainly includes food products and of course the flabbergasting petrol prices, ultimately triggering the cost of living crisis we are currently experiencing. By bringing manufacturing back to Australia, we can enhance supply chain resilience by reducing our dependence on foreign suppliers and ensuring access to critical goods during current and future economic disruptions. Further, local manufacturing will lead to economic diversification, meaning it will reduce our over-reliance on single industries like mining and agriculture, which will contribute to not only economic security, but economic growth as well, ultimately leading to the establishment of Australia's economic complexity. My second point for this evening is that by bringing manufacturing back to Australia, it will contribute to the reduction of our carbon footprint. Now, the natural thought process for most people is that an increase in manufacturing of products will lead to an increase in pollution. However, it is not that simple. Yes, manufacturing of products inevitably produces greenhouse gas emissions, but by shifting the manufacturing to be done in our own borders, this will undoubtedly result in a reduction of our overall carbon footprint. And the reason for this can be divided into 3 main facets. First is that currently by manufacturing products offshore and having those goods imported, we are simply shifting our responsibility of the emissions to those offshore companies, meaning by shifting those manufacturers back to Australia, it will not actually cause an increase in emission, it is simply being relocated. And yes, the amount of products being manufactured and degree of greenhouse gas emission may differ slightly by shifting the facilities to Australia, but if anything, the net pollution is likely to decrease, which leads me on to my second factor regarding the source of energy for these manufacturers. Australia is a leading country in clean energy, especially in solar energy, where we produce the largest amount of solar electricity per head in 2021, as reported by Austrade. This makes Australia a desirable and suitable country for manufacturing, contrary to some current heavy manufacturing countries. According to the World Economic Forum and Australia Parliament House, China is the largest manufacturer in the world, responsible for 29% of the global manufacturing output and about 1/4 of Australia's manufactured imports. Now, although China has made progress towards utilising renewable energy, most of the manufacturing is still powered by coal, according to Princeton University, producing copious amounts of carbon dioxide. In fact, China emits a staggering 27% of the entire world's carbon dioxide and 1/3 of the world's greenhouse gases, according to the World Bank. And finally, through both obtaining the raw materials in Australia and manufacturing products from those same materials rather than sending it off for some other country to do it, it will tremendously reduce our carbon footprint associated with the transportation of goods. Freight transportation, or the transportation of goods, accounts for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and this number is expected to double by 2050, making it the highest emitting sector. Therefore, by bringing manufacturing back to Australia, we will have shorter supply chains and maximise the use of renewable energy, ultimately contributing to the reduction of our overall carbon footprint. So, in conclusion, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we, the Affirmative team, believe that we should bring manufacturing back to Australia, as it will reduce our carbon footprint and aid in establishing our economic independence and complexity, guarding us from imminent economic shifts and global shocks in the future. Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Tony.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that Australia should bring back manufacturing, which we, as the negative team, strongly disagree with. We agree with the affirmative theme definition But we would like to add that the question states clearly that the idea is to bring back manufacturing, which we interpret as the topic should focus on the old manufacturing that was lost or on the verge of declining. These include textile clothing and footwear industries, which declined steeply in the 1990s, along with the automotive industry. Today, as first speaker, I'll be talking to you about the foremost unviability of Australia's economic situation to bring back Australia's manufacturing industry, as it lacks comparative advantage in the global market, break it down into its labour cost, operational cost, and safety regulations, which all strongly highlight the lack of competitiveness on the international market. My second point will point out the detrimental ramifications of the government protection for the industry, such as tariffs. Our second speaker will then expand on Australia's economic costs and difficulties of re-establishing an industry, labour shortages, and a low domestic market. Finally, our third speaker will expertly rebut the opposing team's arguments and summarise our team's case. Now, the first affirmative speaker has tried to argue that bringing back manufacturing has tried to reduce the carbon footprint. However, according to the World However, bringing back manufacturing means that we have to establish new factories, establish these new infrastructure in our existing land, which strongly degrades our environment, which instead of reducing our carbon footprint, increases. Now, my first point is that the Australian manufacturing industry does not have the comparative advantage in manufacturing, which means that it is not easily able to compete with countries that dominate in manufacturing. This will lead to decreased ability to export goods, limiting the economic viability of the manufacturing industry. By the time Japan became an export powerhouse in the 1960s, producing top quality goods at much lower prices, it became increasingly difficult to justify paying top dollar for substandard local product. By the 1970s, Australian manufacturing was in decline. Local manufacturers were unable to compete with imported goods. Imports were much cheaper than goods produced in Australia, which meant business and governments alike began to consistently offshore contracts for products and projects. Economics professor Collar from University of New South Wales says, business just wants to make good business decisions, and the cheap labour, helpful local government, and increasing level of human capital means that makes a lot of sense to set up operations in China or India. Now, according to the BCG Global Manufacturing Competitiveness Index, Australia is ranked the worst performing out of the 22 economies, in dropping 21% points relatively to the US. It is not surprising that China and India are the top two on the list, making them the manufacturing powerhouse and the more competitive option in the global market. This is due to their low labour cost. China has the largest manufacturing workforce with over 112 million workers. The average hourly wage of Chinese workers in manufacturing is 5.5 USD per hour, against the Australia average of 15 USD per hour, according to a logistics bureau. China has become known as the world's factory because of its strong business ecosystem, lack of regulatory compliance, low taxes and duties, and its competitive currency practice, all of which manufacturing in Australia cannot match. Australia has also suffers from inescapable problems of distance from major markets and lack of scale, which means that it cannot overcome disadvantage of its high labour costs, as do manufacturers in countries like Germany and Japan who also suffer from the same problem. So, if we cannot sacrifice our well-established working conditions, our restrictive regulations which protect our workers, and products to gain a comparative advantage in the global market, what can we do? Well, the manufacturing has to rely on government protection to live, which it has been in the past century. This leads to my second point, which is that Australia's economic situation is unviable for mass manufacturing industry, as the industry only survived in the past based upon government protection. Before I discuss the current global market, I would like to analyse the weaknesses of the Australian manufacturing industry prior to its decline. The first major problem is Australia's manufacturing industry has been heavily reliant on protection. And when there was, at the past, there was first the natural geographical protection of Australia. At the start of the 20th century, we were a long way from our traditional trading partner, Britain. And in an era of relatively stable exchange rates, it was economic to make your own things, which led to the growth of Australian manufacturing. However, as the age of globalization arrives, this protection is gone, which will lose this point of local manufacturing. The second, and the most prominent, was trade protections. Tariffs, subsidies, and import quotas cushioned our industries from the winds of change blowing through the global economy. The car industry had over 200% tariffs levels in the past, along with the textile, clothing, and footwear industry, which were also highly protected. Levels of protection remained high through the 1970s and 80s. But the tariffs were a double-edged sword. The idea of this tariff by the government over time was that over time, protection will be drawn back as firms learn to compete, improve their productivity, and hopefully become exporters in world-class forms. However, this never happened in Australia. Instead, protection of the tariff became highly politicized. Manufacturing firms became adept at lobbying for even higher tariffs. Craig Emerson, a former Labour minister and economic advisor to Bob Hawke, says that the tariffs were actually costing the Australian economy and its consumers by pushing up the prices of imported goods, undermining the market in locally produced goods. Economists says that the tariffs proved to be a massive disincentive for industrial excellence, with the ABC reporting that local manufacturing was kind of on a sheltered gravy train here. There was really no incentive to take risks or engage in anything approaching excellent manufacturing capacity. Historical trends also supports by economic theory that shows that the increase in tariffs would decrease the GDP growth. With 10% price increase in such products across the world lead to real GDP in Australia being 1.8% lower, which hinders Australia's economy growth. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the manufacturing industry from the beginning was not a robust and thriving industry on its own. If we don't implement government protection, the industry will have no competitiveness in the global market. But if we do, these protections will disturb the free market economy and leads to negative ramifications. Therefore, we firmly believe Australia should not bring back the manufacturing industry. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Julia.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, timekeeper, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julia and I'll be your second affirmative speaker for the debate today. The topic for tonight's debate is that we should bring manufacturing back to Australia. We, the affirmative team, strongly believe the statement to be true. Before moving on to my own case, I would like to consider the arguments that the first negative speaker has attempted to convince you. To begin with, I would like to address the definition. So the first speaker has tried to convince you that we should define manufacturing as manufacturing clothing and those kind of items, but the bill passed by the government stated by bringing back manufacturing should reclaim Australian reputation as a country that makes things. It did not state which industries in particular should be brought back. the world is evolving, don't you agree with that? And so the products that are in demand currently are also evolving. So we believe that we should define manufacturing as the production of goods in large quantities that are in demand. Now, the first speaker also tried to tell you that bringing back manufacturing is going to be hard because it will be hard to compete with the countries that are already on the global market. Yes, it will be hard to compete with the current manufacturers. But why would it be hard to compete? Because they produce cheaper products. And why are those products cheaper? Because they use cheap labor and unethical things, well, not unethical, but things that produce global emissions, such as coal. So we should focus not only on just making money, but we should also focus on creating an ethical manufacturing that can combat global challenges. We should try to create innovations and new ways of production that can focus on creating more efficient products. Thus, we can make our products cheaper and combat the production that uses cheap labor that leads to poverty of workers. Now, I would like to recap our team's points. Our first speaker has already stated that developing manufacturing in Australia will help us to reduce our reliance on other countries, thus protecting the Australian economy from external shocks. Additionally, she stated that bringing manufacturing back to Australia will reduce our carbon footprint. As your second speaker, I will explain that domestic manufacturing is crucial in forming a progressive and professional workforce, developing our regional areas, and fostering innovations in Australia. Then our third speaker will summarise the affirmative case and rebut all the opposing arguments. So, my first point for tonight's debate is that expanding domestic manufacturing in Australia is vital for a large, highly skilled Australian workforce, and for rapid economic and technological development of the Australian regional areas. Currently, a lot of Australian companies are moving their production offshore, which results in Australian production centres being shut down and the staff being dismissed. For example, in 2020, Huggies moved their big production centre from Sydney to Asia, which resulted in over 220 jobs being lost. Now, 220 jobs may not seem like a lot, but this trend has been observed all over Australia since late 2000s. The Office of the Chief Economist estimates that since 2008, over 155,000 jobs in manufacturing have been lost due to the relocation of factories offshore. So, large Australian companies are employing staff overseas, while our country is suffering high unemployment rates. We, the affirmative team, believe that by reviving manufacturing in Australia, we can create a diverse pool of work opportunities requiring various levels of skill and education, catering for all working certifications, thus leading to expansion of the Australian workforce and economic growth. Huggies also stated that they decided to move their production line to Asia because that would enable faster access to later research and engineering advancements. However, wouldn't you agree that despite not having the latest research here in Australia at the moment, we certainly have a large number of qualified workers capable of embracing the latest knowledge? Around 10,000 engineers graduate each year, according to the Engineer Analysis Australia. These graduates are keen for working and learning opportunities, which can certainly be provided by developing domestic manufacturing. And yes, it is important to develop the latest research and technological advancements in production, but we believe that there's a better way to do so than moving our production overseas. By allowing the Australian workforce to acquire the latest knowledge through professional development and further education, advanced, globally competitive centres can be developed here in Australia. In this manner, Australia can cater for both high quality of the products manufactured and highly skilled domestic workers. And as will be discussed in my second point later, embracing the qualified specialists and facilities here will allow for technological development and innovation to occur within our country. Now, increasing manufacturing and creating new job positions will also lead to development of rural areas. To exemplify that, I will discuss the story of Israel. Due to various conflicts in the Middle East, Israel was forced to become self-sufficient, which led to its rapid economic growth, turning the desert land with little natural resources into a first world country with frontier manufacturing. Due to the government promoting domestic manufacturing through various policies, Israel is now a world leader in advanced technologies and innovations, as stated by the Manufacturers Association of Israel. So why can't we follow the example of Israel? Regional Australia has great conditions for manufacturing, starting from vast spaces for factories to easy access to various natural resources. Establishing manufacturing in regional Australia will help to increase population in the regions and bring new technologies to less advanced areas, thus improving the standard of living there and stimulating economic growth. My second point for tonight's debate is that expanding Australia's domestic manufacturing will increase our revenues and foster advanced research. At the moment, more than 2/3 of the Australian exports are raw resources, and only 6.7% is manufacturing, as stated by the Reserve Bank of Australia. By exporting processed products instead of raw materials, Australia can significantly increase its revenues, since with each processing step added, the added value of the export increases. And by obtaining higher revenues from production, manufacturing companies will pay more money in tax, thus contributing to higher funding towards education, medicine, and industrial development as a direct result of the expanded GDP. Furthermore, larger revenues are likely to propel the government to further support manufacturing by providing tax incentives for companies to research more cost-effective and ecologically sustainable production methods. These innovations will ensure accessibility of the products and their competitiveness on the global market, while the sustainable production methods will bring Australia closer to the no emissions goal. The importance of manufacturing to economic and technological development can be clearly demonstrated by the story of the city of Detroit. During the first half of the 20th century, Detroit became the richest city in the USA due to the large revenues generated by the developing automotive factories based there. In 50 years, Detroit's population increased from 280,000 to 1.85 million. There, in search for more competitive production methods, Henry Ford invented the first moving assembly line in the automotive industry. And this invention reduced the production time by a factor of 8 and made the Ford cars more accessible to the public. So, as the world is going through the fourth industrial revolution, characterized by rapid technological advancements, frontier research and innovation centres will be critical for Australia to keep pace with the demands of the global market. So, constant advancements in manufacturing is necessary for the economic future of Australia. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that bringing manufacturing back to Australia is essential for fostering innovations and increasing GDP in our country. Remember, it was the Australian National Science Agency that invented Wi-Fi. So who says we cannot become the innovation powerhouse in the 21st century? So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, we, the Affirmative team, strongly believe that bringing manufacturing back to Australia is essential for achieving the goals of our nation, starting from providing young graduates and all keen workers with various job opportunities, to fostering innovative technologies in our country. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Charles.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that we should bring manufacturing back to Australia, which we, the negative team, strongly believe to be false. Our first speaker has argued that we lack comparative advantage in manufacturing, necessitating government intervention and the problems associated with this. He then discussed the necessity of this comparative advantage to maintain Australian labour and safety laws. Tonight, I will rebut some of the Affirmative team's argument. Then, I will discuss the great labour shortages facing Australian manufacturing and how increasing manufacturing will only amplify this issue. Finally, I will discuss how Australia's domestic market is insufficient to support the manufacturing industry due to its small size. Our third speaker will then expertly rebut some of the Affirmative team's argument and summarise our team's case. The first Affirmative speaker has tried to argue that manufacturing will ensure self-sufficiency of the Australian economy. However, the concept of economic self-sufficiency may seem like a tempting solution in today's volatile geopolitical landscape, but it's crucial to scrutinise this approach through the lens of established economic theories and empirical evidence. According to the World Trade Organization, international trade isn't just a theoretical benefit, it can tangibly elevate a country's GDP by as much as 5%, a significant margin by any standard. This is not merely an abstract concept. It is corroborated by a study from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which found that countries embracing international trade grow at 1.5 times faster than their more insular counterparts. Now consider Australia's position. By pivoting towards domestic manufacturing, we're not just missing out on these proven avenues for growth, we're actively risking our economy's stability. Making it so it would not only be a gamble, but could also make us acutely vulnerable to sector-specific downturns. Imagine the domino effect. A weakened manufacturing sector could lead to rising unemployment rates, currently at a manageable 5.6%, and subsequently reduced consumer spending. The ripple effects could be catastrophic. Moreover, let's not overlook the major influence in the services sector. It's not just another industry, it's the linchpin of our economy, contributing about 60% to our GDP. A sudden, disproportionate focus on manufacturing could unbalance this finely tuned economic system, causing instability not just in the short term, but potentially derailing our medium-term economic prospects as well. Lastly, self-sufficiency isn't just a matter of economics, it's a matter of innovation. By insulating ourselves from global competition, we risk stagnating our technological progress. And let's be clear, innovation isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, contributing to approximately 22% of Australia's economic growth, as per the Department of Industry, Science and Energy Resources. My first point is that Australian manufacturing industry's labour shortage will greatly inhibit the ability for the manufacturing industry to expand. If you ask any Australian manufacturer what the biggest problem facing the Australian manufacturing industry is, they'll all tell you the same thing: labour shortages. According to the Australian Industry Group, as of 2023, 80% of employers within the manufacturing industry are currently struggling to find workers. They expect this number to grow to 90% by the end of the year. There are two factors primarily driving this labour shortage. Firstly, it is indicative of modern attitudes towards manufacturing jobs, who are choosing modern services over manufacturing jobs. Service jobs are seen as comfortable and pay well, whilst manufacturing jobs are stigmatised as low-paying and dangerous jobs that our ever-increasingly educated populations see as substandard. Secondly, the labour shortage is due to an increasingly elderly workforce. As of 2020, people over 55 years old contributed to 19% of the total Australian workforce. Contrast this with the 5% of manufacturing workers over 55, it is clear that manufacturing is a young man's job. So, considering the labour shortages in our current manufacturing industry, imagine how severe it would become with significant increases in the number of manufacturing jobs. It is often advertised how many jobs manufacturing will bring, but this is in fact not a limitation. And this is in fact a limitation, not an advantage. People are avoiding the current manufacturing jobs, and increasing the number of manufacturing jobs won't change this. Not only is the labour shortage in the Australian manufacturing industry bad now, but it will only get worse. As education improves, more and more people are drawn to better, more educated jobs. And is there anything wrong with this trend? Do we want an economy that disincentivises an educated population? I don't. Furthermore, as medical advances increase life expectancy more and more, people can and need to work later and later in life. Thus, the proportion of elderly workers unable to do manufacturing jobs only increases. Once again, this is overall a positive trend. The only way to decrease the labour shortage is increased wages, but as our first speaker has already outlined, this will only amplify other problems within the industry. My second point is that our small domestic market will limit the profitability and hence sustainability of our manufacturing industry. As our first speaker has already discussed, due to the Australian manufacturing industry's lack of comparative advantage, exporting goods will be completely unviable. Thus, the industry will be reliant on a domestic market with tariffs or such that allow them to recapture some of this competitive advantage over foreign imported goods. According to a report by the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Australian machinery and equipment and petroleum, coal and chemical sub-industries gear their goods primarily to the domestic market due to their exposure to strong competition from international imports. However, our domestic market is simply too small to sustain such an industry. Our population is 25 million, 0.3% of the world's population, roughly the size of Shanghai, and roughly 1.8% of the world's GDP. Relying on Australia's domestic market to support our manufacturing industry is completely unfeasible. Furthermore, this will result in a small-scale economy, further decreasing this economic efficiency. This is because larger economies can achieve a greater organisational efficiency. Investments in research, technology, marketing, loans and resources provide larger returns and yield when on a larger scale. Economist Lino Briguglio conducted an analysis of manufacturing in 43 countries and found that this effect is pronounced in manufacturing, significantly impacting international development. Comparatively, Australia's high-earning population provides a large service industry, 20% of our exports, enabling a better advantage for Australia in the service sector. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the negative team, strongly believe that we should not bring manufacturing back to Australia due to the great labour shortages that will face the industry and the small domestic market that is insufficient in supporting the industry. Thank you.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Ruben.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ruben and I'll be your third affirmative speaker. The topic of contention for tonight's debate is that we should bring manufacturing back to Australia. We, the affirmative team, unequivocally support this statement, and as proud Aussies, you should too. Now, as the third speaker, I have a responsibility to summarise the entire affirmative argument, but I also have a duty to dissuade you of any points the negative team may have entertained you with. So let's begin with rebuttals. Firstly, I'd like to mention that our team has placed forward to you a definition on the topic that involves innovation and has a mindset on the future, whilst the negative team had presented one on the past. We believe to stay competitive and to stay at the advantage of industry and moving forward, we have to let go of the past and the ways of the past and move forward for industries and demand, and that's just simple market economics. Now on to rebuttals. Their first speaker mentioned problems with manufacturing in Australia with the idea that we have limited factories. So build them. This creates new jobs for people to establish places for us to build this demand. We can also use green energy to build these new manufacturing ports instead of having these factories built in other countries that don't have the same policies around infrastructure building. The first negative speaker has stated that bringing manufacturing back to Australia will harm the environment due to new infrastructure and facilities. However, it seems they completely missed the point of our first speaker. We are not denying that manufacturing produces emissions. We are saying it will decrease our environment, our overall carbon footprint due to our renewable energy and the reduction of transportation. The first affirmative speaker also tried to tell you that people wouldn't want to buy our stuff. We're not competitive. And this was a trend throughout the entire negative argument. However, I'd like to take you back to 2020, 2021 when we were having a trade war with China. We lost our selling of wine. We lost our production of iron to China, and we found other markets to sell them to. This is evidence that we are able to recoil back and sell new products across the world to different markets. They also tried to tell you that we need protection from trade and that it's a volatile situation in the global market and that tariffs kill our economy. Yet, I tell you, unless you're part of the EU and trading within those borders, everyone faces tariffs. Everyone needs to make a profit from sales and it needs to be a competitive market. That's just simple capitalism. The negative team had presented an engaging yet ultimately flawed argument concerning the expenses of home brand manufacturing. It's appealing, sure, yet I implore you to explore this train of thought through its logical conclusion. Firstly, and most obviously, with employers shipping manufacturing overseas, a drastic restriction on employment opportunities for those in our community are imposed. This in turn produces many obstacles. Some of these are inconveniences, such as international shipping wait times, or exotic and luxury car tax imports to receive goods which could have been manufactured in our own backyard. Yet also implicates much more destructive consequences, like joblessness and the mental health effects that ripple from that, or the foreclosure of domestic markets, wrecking not only home brand innovation, but local economy too. Is it not clear that this has a great interpersonal detriment? And although all of these come with rare caveats and exceptions, all of them are linked and direct negative repercussions of the bargain employers make when they employ offshore. P.S. is not only a detriment to our economy and our community, but for those overseas, working at a cheaper rate too. Basic economics will tell you that with enough assured quality, the best choice is always the less expensive one. These governments of nations that set such inhumanely low standards for pay generate wealth for themselves and perpetuate work in their nations. This inflates the pockets of the governments through increased GDP due to artificially low wages. Upsetting this balance means a net loss in their pockets and then necessitates the perpetuation of manufacturing in their nations at both the people's expense and ours. But don't take my word for it. Look at case studies in the People's Republic of China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Philippines, Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It goes on. To bring it full circle to the topic, bringing manufacturing to Australia counters the aforementioned consequences and forces these other authorities to concede competitive wages to keep their economy stable. It's not only a win for us, it's a win for everyone as a global community. They also tried to tell you that we couldn't export globally, that our markets would be sustained within Australia. But I ask you, why don't we export? There are many companies across the world that export that we have right now. Many of you sitting with Apple devices based in the US, seeing Tesla cars driving on our roads, another American invention. The Volkswagen and BMW, European inventions. Why can't we export and make a global Australian brand and name for ourselves? They also try to argue that we have labour shortages. Yet I ask you, would you go into an industry that you knew was a dead end, where there was no opportunities for manufacturing, when manufacturing was going down, where they are closing our Holden manufacturing factories? No. I put it to you that if we reintroduce manufacturing and put in policies that promote this, there will be a shift and increased want and desire to move into these industries. Now, having explored the flaws in the negative team's argument, I would like to succinctly summarize the negative team's case. Our first speaker, Conon, told you first about how bringing manufacturing back to Australia ultimately allows for more diversification in our economy, which we are currently lacking. She also discussed how manufacturing would ultimately increase our supply chain resilience, allowing us to better respond to global shocks, especially given our struggles in supply and demand during the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russo-Ukraine war. Her next point was regarding how Australia is a desirable manufacturing country in terms of energy usage, especially solar, which definitely makes it more ideal for manufacturing than, say, China, as most of their manufacturing power is sourced from coal. She then discussed how these significant emissions involved in the transportation of goods from other countries to Australia, and that manufacturing within our own borders heavily reduces this. Next, our second speaker, Julia, discussed the rise of unemployment that often accompanies the outsourcing of manufacturing jobs to other countries. She eloquently explained that in moving manufacturing back to Australia, that there would be significant increases in the development of skilled workers, ultimately causing employment rates to rise again. This in turn would form a higher portion of Australians to be paying taxes, which the government can effectively utilise for education, healthcare, infrastructure, and so much more. Finally, she discussed how this could ultimately cause an increase in the development of regional areas in Australia. Her second and final point for this evening was that bringing back manufacturing, we are promoting the growth of our economy and an increase in our country's GDP and overall revenue and more advanced research. So ladies and gentlemen, for all the benefits stated above, we believe it is quintessential that we bring manufacturing back to Australia. Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Nevin.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. As your third speaker today, I will be summarising my team's case and rebutting the opposition's argument for Australia's reintroduction of manufacturing. Now, the first affirmative speaker tried to discuss the benefits of manufacturing to the environment, and while the environmental benefits of domestic manufacturing are undeniably compelling, let's not be blinded. This approach is far from the silver bullet it's often portrayed to be. The Australian Renewable Energy Agency cautions that achieving full sustainability or large sustainability in manufacturing could require a decades-long commitment. This extended timeline isn't merely a logistical challenge, it opens a door to economic vulnerabilities and geopolitical instabilities that could derail progress. Moreover, the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health points out that environmental issues transcend national borders. Efforts to green Australia's manufacturing could be undermined by less stringent regulations in neighbouring countries like Indonesia or China, making this a transboundary issue that demands a coordinated international response. Additionally, research from the University of Sydney suggests that the environmental impact of manufacturing can differ widely depending on the industry and technology used in the circumstance. This variability complicates the notion that domestic manufacturing is universally more sustainable. Furthermore, the Australian industry has highlighted the high initial costs of transitioning to greener manufacturing methods, which could affect consumer prices and erode international competitiveness. This financial burden could act as a significant deterrent to investment in sustainable technologies. And finally, the Department of Energy, Science and Resources notes that many sustainable technologies are still in the developmental phases, potentially leading to technological bottlenecks that could slow production rates and inflate costs, thereby making the entire endeavour less economically viable. Now onto the second affirmative speaker's point. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that reviving manufacturing will improve the workforce overall. However, the notion that reviving manufacturing will create jobs and stimulate the economy is undeniably attractive, yet this argument warrants a closer look, especially when considering several factors that could undermine its effectiveness. Let's begin with the elephant in the room: automation. According to a comprehensive study by the McKinsey Global Institute, automation technologies could affect up to 45% of existing jobs. This isn't just a minor footnote, it's a headline that demands our attention. Can we genuinely champion manufacturing as a job creator when automation is not just on the horizon, but already here, poised to redefine the employment landscape once and for all? Moreover, automation isn't just targeting low-skilled jobs either. It's encroaching on roles that require specialized skills, casting a long shadow over the long-term sustainability of job growth in this sector. Now, next, we turn our attention to the skill set required for modern manufacturing. A report by the Australian Industry Group reveals that 75% of employers in Australia are grappling with skill shortages in sectors requiring vocational education and training. This glaring mismatch between the available workforce and the specialized skills needed for modern manufacturing isn't just a minor hiccup. It's a significant hurdle we all have to face as Australians. Are we prepared to offset the economic benefits of job creation with the hidden costs of retraining? And let's not forget, these retraining programs are not only costly, but they're also pretty time-consuming, potentially delaying the economic benefits that proponents of manufacturing revival promise. Finally, let's not overlook the broader labour market dynamics. Data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show that the services sector employs a significantly larger percentage of the workforce compared to manufacturing. A sudden dramatic shift towards manufacturing could send shockwaves throughout these labour markets, leading to transitional unemployment as workers move between sectors. This isn't a mere inconvenience as it is a potential destabiliser for our economy, at least in the short term, as discussed by a second speaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, our team has conducted a thorough analysis of the myriad challenges that come with rejuvenating Australia's manufacturing sector. Our first speaker highlighted the economic hurdles we face, notably the absence of a comparative advantage and what that means for Australian labour standards and safety regulations. The second speaker extended this discussion by pointing out the labour shortages we are currently experiencing, as well as the limitations imposed by a relatively small domestic market. As we navigate complex issues like economic stability, global standing, and national security, it's crucial that our solutions be more than just emotionally resonant with the audience. They must also be realistic, actionable, and in line with Australia's long-term strategic interests. Finally, in the words of Winston Churchill, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. We as a negative team urge you to consider the comprehensive insights presented today and make informed decisions that will shape the future of our nation, Australia. Thank you.